The Velorian scout ship drifted into sensor range at exactly 347 hours, and Commander Petra Volkov was already on her third cup of terrible coffee when the proximity alarm started screaming at her. She did not spill the coffee. That alone should have told the Velorian something. Contact bearing 270, elevation +15, called out Lieutenant Dio Osei from the tactical station, his voice carrying that particular brand of controlled panic that junior officers practice in the mirror. They're not cloaked, Commander. They're broadcasting. Petra set down her mug with a soft click. Broadcasting what? Dio turned in his chair, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before on a 12-year Navy veteran. It was somewhere between offense and bewilderment, like a man who had just been handed a fruit basket at a funeral. Laughter, ma'am. They are broadcasting laughter. Now, you have to understand something about the UES Resolute before we go any further. She was not a beautiful ship. She had never been a beautiful ship. Built in 2031, she was a Montana-class battleship, and not the sleek, angular, aggressive kind of warship that fills recruitment posters and gets featured in documentaries with dramatic music. No, the Resolute looked like someone had welded a parking garage to a submarine and then asked a committee to approve the color scheme. She had thick, riveted armor plating that the engineering corps had been patching and repatching for 19 years. She had gun turrets, actual, physical, rotating gun turrets, at a time when every other human vessel had moved on to directed energy arrays and quantum disruption cannons. She ran on a modified fission reactor that the crew called Grandpa, partly as a term of endearment and partly because it wheezed at high output. She was, by every modern military metric, completely obsolete. The Galactic Union had said so, politely, at 3 consecutive interstellar defense summits. Earth's own Admiralty had said so, loudly, in front of a budget committee. 2 separate hegemony diplomats had said so while trying very hard not to be rude about it, which only made it worse. The Resolute had been scheduled for decommissioning 4 times, and 4 times some combination of political gridlock, nostalgic senators, and sheer bureaucratic inertia had kept her floating. The 5th decommissioning order was sitting unsigned on Admiral Hargreaves' desk right now, back on Luna Station. The Velorians, apparently, had done their research. The broadcast resolved into something approximating a translated signal. The Velorians were members of the Union, after all, and their translation matrices were top tier. What came through the speakers on the Resolute's bridge was a rich, multi-tonal voice dripping with the specific kind of condescension that only comes from a species that has been spacefaring for 4,000 years longer than you have. Attention, human vessel. We have identified your classification as Montana class. We are cross-referencing. Yes, Montana class battleship, commissioned Earth year 2031. We want you to know that we mean no disrespect. A long pause, more laughter in the background. We are simply taking a moment. The irony of encountering this particular vessel in this particular situation is not lost on us. Please hold. Petra stared at the speaker like it owed her money. Chief Engineer Bogdan Sekopansky pulled himself up from the engineering console and folded his arms across his chest. He was a large man from Krakow who had been keeping Grandpa alive through sheer stubbornness and colorful profanity for 11 years, and he had a look on his face right now that Petra recognized as the precursor to something expensive. They are laughing at my ship, he said quietly. Our ship, Dio corrected. My ship, Bogdan said, without any change in expression. The Velorian vessel was a Piercer-class strike cruiser, which was a significant step up from a scout ship, but nowhere near a capital ship. Sleek, silver-white, built in the last decade with the kind of clean lines that suggested a civilization that had long since stopped worrying about whether their warships could actually take a hit. Velorian combat doctrine was all speed and precision. They got in, they disrupted, they got out. They had not fought a sustained engagement in 600 years, which was something their fleet architects seemed to have entirely forgotten about. The communication channel clicked open again. Human Commander, we are here to address the matter of the resource extraction station in the Kepler 442 system. Our clients have a legitimate claim under Union Commercial Code Article 14. Your presence constitutes your clients, Petra said, shot at a civilian survey team 3 days ago. We have the telemetry. So let's skip the part where you quote commercial coded me and get to the part where you tell me what you actually want. A pause. We want you to leave. We're not leaving. Another pause. Longer this time. When the Velorian voice came back, it had shifted, just slightly, into the register of someone who is genuinely baffled by the confidence of the other party and is trying to determine whether it is stupidity or a bluff. Commander, you are aware that your vessel is classified as a pre-integration era platform. Our systems have your Resolute listed under historical artifacts of note. You have kinetic turrets. We have a Velorian Mk7 disruption lance array. I am genuinely uncertain how to frame this more gently. Then don't frame it gently, Petra said. Bogdan, behind her, made a sound that was almost a laugh. The Piercer-class cruiser held its position. On the tactical display, Dio was quietly running combat calculations, threat assessment, response vectors, the geometry of a fight that nobody on the bridge particularly wanted, but everyone was preparing for. At the weapons station, Gunnery Sergeant Imara Bekele had her hands resting on her console with the patient, deliberate stillness of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a very long time and intends to enjoy it properly. Imara had been with the Resolute for 9 years. She had been the one to repair Turret 3 after the Callisto incident, personally rewiring the firing sequencer by hand over a 14-hour shift. She had names for the guns, not official designations, names. The crew found this charming. The enemy was about to find it something else entirely. They're charging weapons, Dio said. The Velorian voice returned, and now it had dispensed with all pretense of politeness. This is your final opportunity to withdraw. We are doing you a courtesy. That ship should be in a museum. Petra Volkov looked at the tactical display for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Imara. Sergeant Bekele, Commander, show them what Rita can do. Imara smiled. Rita was Turret 1. What happened next was not something the Velorians had in their threat assessment database. Because here is the thing about kinetic weapons, that 4,000 years of directed energy development tends to make civilizations forget. There is no countermeasure for a very large piece of dense metal moving very fast. Disruption lances work by destabilizing coherent energy fields. Plasma dissipators scatter charged particle streams. Every form of defensive technology the Velorians had was designed around the assumption that anyone shooting at them would be doing so with something that could be scattered, disrupted, or redirected. Nobody had designed a defense against a gun. The Resolute's Turret 1, Rita, fired a single ranging shot, not at the Piercer-class cruiser, at the navigational beacon 300 kilometers off its port side, a marker buoy that had been floating in this system for 50 years. The ranging shot vaporized it in a single clean impact, and the shockwave rippled across the Velorian ship's sensor array like a slap. The laughter stopped. They've dropped their weapon charge, Dio said, and he could not keep the satisfaction out of his voice. Hailing frequencies, Petra said. The channel opened. She could hear, very faintly, Velorian voices talking to each other in rapid, agitated tones. Their translator was still running, and she caught fragments, words like mass driver and impact dispersal, and one phrase that translated approximately as, "They still use those." "Yes," Petra said pleasantly into the silence. "We still use those. We have 12 of them. Would you like a demonstration of what Turret 2 does?" Her name is Constance, and she has been waiting 19 years for someone to point her at. The Velorian commander took 47 seconds to respond. Petra knew because she counted. She had learned, over 19 years of command, that silence was its own kind of weapon, and she intended to let it work. When the voice came back, it was different. The rich condescension had been replaced by something tighter, more careful. The vocal equivalent of a man who has just stepped on a floor he thought was solid and felt it flex beneath his boot. "Commander, we are reassessing our position." "Take your time," Petra said. Behind her, Bogdan was doing something at the engineering console that involved a great deal of quiet muttering and what sounded like a prayer in Polish. The Resolute's power grid was holding steady. Grandpa was humming along at 63% output, which was comfortable territory. Bogdan had once pushed Grandpa to 91% during the Callisto situation, and the resulting sound had been described by 3 separate crew members as a large animal being sat on. But 63% was fine. 63% was easy. Dio had not taken his hands off the tactical console since the ranging shot. His eyes were moving between the Piercer-class cruiser and the wider sensor field, watching the geometry of the situation with the focused attention of a man who suspects that the thing in front of him is not the only thing to worry about. He was right, but he did not know that yet. The second contact appeared on the outer edge of sensor range 11 minutes after the ranging shot, and it arrived the way bad news usually does. Quietly, from a direction nobody was watching. Commander. Dio's voice had changed register. Second contact. Bearing 045, elevation -30. Classification. He stopped. Typed something. Stopped again. Commander, I'm reading a Keth-Orran heavy carrier. The bridge went quiet, in a specific way that bridges go quiet when the situation has just become significantly more serious than it was 30 seconds ago. The Keth-Orran were not members of the Galactic Union. They were, technically, a protected commercial partner, which was a diplomatic phrase that meant we know they do questionable things, but their fuel refining contracts are too valuable to risk. They were also the clients the Velorian commander had mentioned, the ones with the legitimate claim to the Kepler 442 extraction station. They were large, patient, and thoroughly unpleasant, and their heavy carriers were the kind of vessel that did not need to be fast, because the mere act of showing up was usually enough. This one was 140,000 tons of heavily armored persuasion, and it had just dropped out of whatever transit fold it had been using, and was now sitting on the edge of the system like a very large, very unpleasant surprise. The Velorian commander's voice returned, and the tightness was gone. The condescension was back, but it was a different kind now. Not amused, but certain, the certainty of a man who has just been dealt a very good hand and knows it. Commander Volkov, I trust your sensors are working. You are now looking at the KOV dominance. 84 weapons arrays, a complement of 412 strike fighters, and, I am told, a very limited patience for complications. A pause. I will ask again. Leave. Imara Bekele, at the weapons console, had not moved. Her hands were still resting on the console with that same patient stillness. She was looking at Petra, and her expression was a question. Petra looked at the tactical display. The Keth-Orran carrier was big, genuinely, impressively big, and its weapons complement was not a bluff. Against a modern human warship, even a fleet destroyer, the dominance would be a serious problem. Against the Resolute, she thought about the decommissioning order on Admiral Hargreaves' desk. She thought about what Bogdan had told her 3 months ago, during a long transit between systems, while they were sharing terrible coffee in the engine room, and Grandpa was humming quietly in the background. He had shown her, on a scratched tablet, 19 years of modifications, 19 years of patches, upgrades, workarounds, and inventions born purely from necessity. The Resolute was not the ship she had been in 2031. She was something stranger and more dangerous, and almost entirely undocumented, because the people who had been changing her had not always bothered to file the paperwork. Bogdan, Petra said. Commander, tell me about the Kepler grid. A long silence from the engineering console. Then, quietly, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a long time for someone to ask a specific question, "It is ready," she heard Dio exhale. The Kepler 442 system was, on the surface, unremarkable. A mid-sequence star, 7 planets, one of which had a mildly interesting extraction station sitting on an asteroid belt that somebody had decided was worth fighting over. What the system also had, and what the Resolute had spent the last 11 days quietly doing, was a network of 19 relay buoys distributed across the asteroid belt's inner edge, each one loaded with a very specific package that Bogdan Sikpansky had assembled from components that were, individually, entirely legitimate and completely harmless. The Keth-Orran had not noticed, because the buoys broadcast on standard navigational frequencies, and standard navigational frequencies were the wallpaper of space travel, present everywhere, registered by nobody. Koev Dominance, this is Commander Petra Volkov of the United Earth ship Resolute. She kept her voice level and pleasant, the way she always kept it when she was about to do something drastic. I want to be very clear about what is about to happen, so that there is no confusion afterward. You have entered a restricted system perimeter. This system is under active United Earth Navy Protection Order, filed with the Galactic Union Secretariat 48 hours ago. Reference code 77 Delta 9. Your presence constitutes an act of commercial aggression under Union Treaty Article 31. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal. The response from the Dominance was not words. It was a targeting lock, a hard, aggressive, I am about to shoot you targeting lock that painted the Resolute across every sensor frequency simultaneously. It was the kind of targeting lock that was meant to be felt, a statement, an emphasis. 20 seconds, Petra said. Commander, Dio said. They're launching fighters, not all 412. 120. A probe, a test of her nerve, a gesture toward overwhelming force. The kind of move you make when you want someone to blink. Bogdan, Petra said. Light them up. The Kepler grid came online. What the buoys contained, assembled, was a phased electromagnetic pulse network, not a weapon, technically, under Union commercial law, because each individual component was a standard navigational aid, and the network effect was, technically, an unintended consequence of overlapping broadcast frequencies, which was a legal argument that Bogdan had written out on 3 pages of dense technical language that Petra had signed without fully understanding and trusted completely. What it did, practically, was not destroy anything. It did something more elegant. It overloaded the Keth-Orran fighters' navigational processors, not catastrophically, not permanently, but thoroughly enough that 120 strike fighters suddenly had no idea which direction they were pointed. They did not explode, they did not crash, they simply drifted, confused, spinning gently in the dark like very expensive, very embarrassing toys. The bridge of the Resolute was silent for 3 seconds. Then Dio made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was definitely the sound a laugh makes when it is trying to be professional and failing. The Velorian Piercer-class cruiser, which had been watching all of this from a safe distance, was now broadcasting again, not to the Resolute but to the Dominance, in Velorian frequencies that their translator was only partially catching. Fragments came through, did not assess correctly, and the old vessel has, and one phrase that resolved, with beautiful clarity, as we recommended a different approach. The Keth-Orran carrier did not respond on open frequencies. What it did was rotate, slowly, deliberately, and begin recalling its drifting fighters. They're pulling back, Dio said, and this time he did not attempt to suppress the satisfaction. Hailing the Dominance, said Communications Officer Yuki Tanaka, who had been so quietly efficient throughout the entire engagement that Petra had almost forgotten she was there. Yuki had a gift for becoming furniture during a crisis, and reappearing at exactly the moment she was needed. On screen, Petra said. The Keth-Orran commander appeared on the main display, heavy-featured, four-armed, wearing the kind of expression that species develop after millennia of getting what they want through raw intimidation. It was an expression currently in the process of recalibrating. You have disabled Union commercial vessels. I have inconvenienced them, Petra said. Temporarily. They'll have navigational function back in about 6 hours. Plenty of time to plot a course out of a restricted system. This vessel, the Keth-Orran commander began, is not what you expected, Petra finished pleasantly. I know, you looked it up. Montana class, 2031, scheduled for decommissioning. You read the specs from 19 years ago, and you made a decision based on information that was almost 2 decades out of date. She let that sit for a moment. That was a mistake. Another silence. The Keth-Orran were, whatever else they were, not stupid. They were calculating, right now, whether this was recoverable, whether they could escalate further, call additional assets, file a union complaint, pursue this through some other avenue that did not involve the humiliation of having their fighter wing disabled by what their own databases had classified as a museum piece. The calculation was taking a while. Bogdan spoke up from engineering, quietly enough that only Petra could hear him. "Grandpa is at 51%. We are fine." She nearly smiled. "The extraction station survey rights," she said to the Keth-Orran commander, "are under United Earth jurisdiction pending the Union review. That review has been filed. When it concludes, if your claim is legitimate under Union law, you will receive appropriate access through legal channels." She paused. "Until then, I am going to be here, on this ship, drinking bad coffee, and if you send more fighters, I will inconvenience them as well." The Keth-Orran commander stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, the channel closed. The Dominance continued its withdrawal. Slow, steady, enormous, a mountain moving out of the way, which was something mountains did not usually do, and the sheer improbability of it filled the bridge of the Resolute with a silence that felt almost ceremonial. The Velorian Piercer-class cruiser had already gone to transit fold. No farewell, no final broadcast. Just gone. In the way of things that leave quickly because staying means acknowledging what just happened. Petra picked up her coffee mug. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "Dio," she said. "Log the engagement. Full record. Every frequency, every telemetry reading. Send it to Union Secretariat, Luna Station, and Admiral Hargreaves' office directly." "Admiral Hargreaves," Dio said carefully, "is the one who hasn't signed the decommissioning order yet." "Yes," Petra said. A pause. "You want it to arrive on his desk at the same time as the order." "I want it to arrive on his desk instead of the order," she said. "File it under Active Engagement Record. That classification automatically suspends decommissioning proceedings under Navy Regulation 44, subsection C." Dio stared at her. "Did you know that before today?" "I looked it up 6 months ago," she said, "when they announced the 5th decommissioning." Bogdan at the engineering console made a sound that was absolutely a laugh and made no attempt whatsoever to disguise it. Imara Bekele, at weapons, was grinning in the specific way of someone who has just watched a very old and very stubborn thing refuse to die. Yuki Tanaka was already composing the transmission with the efficient serenity of someone who has worked for Petra Volkov long enough to understand that the plan is usually 17 steps ahead of the moment you are currently in. The Resolute held her position in the Kepler 442 system. Grandpa hummed. The stars were steady. The extraction station sat undisturbed on its asteroid, surrounded by the buoys that were not technically weapons. Somewhere across the system, 120 Keth-Orran fighters were slowly remembering which way was forward, and somewhere in the files of the Galactic Union Secretariat, cross-referenced under Montana-class, pre-integration era platforms, historical notes. A small automated flag was updating itself, changing a single word in the record of the UES Resolute, replacing one word with another, changing obsolete to something that, after today, fit considerably better. The word was active. She was not beautiful. She was not new. She wheezed at high output, and her paint had been repaired in 17 different colors over 19 years, and her gun turrets rotated with a sound that the crew described as a large, irritable door. But she was here. She was always here. And the universe, it turned out, had not yet managed to come up with a satisfactory answer to that particular fact. Commander Petra Volkov finished her cold coffee, set down the mug, and asked Yuki to start a fresh pot. It was going to be a long watch,